give you. You going to introduce him behind this guy. Okay, we'll stay right there. Anybody know this guy? You don't have to go that far. The once again, the mission committee is coming to you with some missionaries, and I don't apologize for that. I hope you are as eager as the committee is of furthering the gospel of Jesus all over the world. And most of us don't have the guts to do what these families have done that we've been presenting. And last year we were very active at trying to get everybody in and giving them extra money and trying to help them out. And today we're doing the same thing. And I'll for right now, today will be the last time we ask for money out of your pockets. But we want you to dig deep. But we won't have probably another person coming through unless somebody surprises us. And you know how God is. He could surprise us. But we are working on getting Gary and Barb's other daughter to come visit with us. She's going out with Sims, which used to be, Sims was Gladys, wasn't it? Or, huh? Was Gladys with Sims? Right? All right. What's the other one? Joanne. Joanne's name when I knew one of the ladies was with Sims. But so we're going to today after the service, we're going to take a love offering for Bennett's, and so we will hope that you will bless them. And we're going to Phil knows these people real well, so I asked him to introduce them this morning. So Pastor Phil, there you go.
Thank you, JD. Good morning. Well, I'm Pastor Phil Butler. Nice to be here. My wife and I, we got the Sunday off, and we wouldn't miss this for nothing. We've known Gary since we were college students together at the University of Northwestern in Minnesota, don't you know? And we remember Gary when we thought he was going to be a bachelor to the rapture. And we followed Gary's career all along for the last 50 years. And each church that I have pastored, each main church I have pastored, Gary has been one of our missionaries. We had him at our church in Illinois. We had him in our church in Bible camp in Minnesota. And he was a part of this ministry down here when we were here. And this is great. We followed our life together, and now we're trying to figure out retirement together. And so without any further ado, I'm honored to introduce to you today your missionaries, Gary and Barb Bennett. Come on up. And Paul and Megan, come on up. I guess you guys are first.
Yeah, so we're not Gary and Barb. If you couldn't figure that out, we haven't been around for 50 years. So I'm Paul. This is Megan. Megan is the youngest of Gary and Barb's daughters, and we are going to be going to Bangkok, Thailand.
Oh, are we supposed to do this from up here? Okay. Yeah, so we're really excited to be with World Venture, the same organization as Mom and Dad. We have just really seen the impact that they have had on my life, on their lives, of keeping them on the field for 40, 50 years. That's pretty impressive. And we just really appreciate the intentionality that they have and that they coat everything in prayer. So we were appointed in February of 2024 with World Venture. I'll start then. So yeah, I grew up in Rwanda. I absolutely loved being a missionary kid, and I just thought the world of just that experience and felt so honored that God called my parents and that they raised us overseas. Throughout a whole lot of different things, God kept them there, and just really appreciated how God moved through them and through all the lives of all the people supporting us, all the family, a lot of people just praying us through a lot of things that happened. So I first attended, the first birth that I ever watched was in Rwanda with a missionary midwife, and that kind of brought about all of this healthcare stuff that I am involved in now. I'm a nurse, a NICU nurse, and it's really cool to just see how God planted the seed when I was young of, hey, I actually think that you will someday be overseas working with moms and babies. So it's really cool to see how God worked.
Yeah, and for me, I grew up in a small town in Minnesota. in a town of 1,200 people. That top left picture is my whole family, my grandparents and my parents and all of my siblings and their little ones. And then I grew up inside of a bicycle shop. My dad owns a bicycle shop, and he has pretty much since I was born. And so I just grew up working on bikes my entire life. And so that's something that we're going to be tapping into once we get over into Thailand as well, is using that and utilizing that to help with community outreach and different things like that. This right here is the Thai language. Well, it's the alphabet, I should say. It looks a little confusing probably to most of you, if not all. That is what we're going to be walking into when we get to Thailand. And so with that, our first 2 years is going to be language and culture study. So learning how to speak that language so that we can speak their heart language to them and preach the gospel to them in that way. And what I shared in Sunday school was, if somebody from Thailand came here and started, speaking their language and trying to preach the gospel to you, you'd probably just look at them with a blank stare. And so we don't want to go over there and just try and start speaking English to them, because it's not going to resonate the same way as if we speak their language. And so that's a little bit of what that looks like. Up on the top left, obviously, we can all read that one. That's hello. Underneath of that, not so much, right? That's Sawadee Krap is what I would say. And then for Megan, she would say
Sawadee ka.
And so there's male and female versions of what you would say for each word, for everything. And one other thing is, it's a tonal language, so there's 5 different tones for every single word, and they all mean a different thing. So you could be saying cow, or you could be saying doctor. And that's not really a great thing to be mixing up if you're at the doctor. You don't really want to be calling the doctor a cow. So that's part of why we'll be doing that for about 2 years.
Yeah, so Thailand is pretty well known for the fact that it is a big human trafficking hub, specifically Bangkok. So that's something that the Lord has really put on our hearts, is to reach out to these people who are coming out of human trafficking. There's a lot of healing that needs to happen, and a lot of redemption that we really believe, like, the Lord is in that work, and that they need to know that there's hope and healing available for them through a relationship with Jesus. Only 1% of the country is Christian, and that includes like Catholic, Protestant, Mormons, I think, too. So really, there's not a whole lot of people who really truly believe in Jesus. So there's a huge need. And in addition to that, there's only about 67% of the population haven't even heard the name of Jesus. So not only do they not have a relationship with Jesus, they've never heard of Jesus. So we're really excited to be part of just sharing about Jesus in a really needy place. One thing that I'll be doing is crisis pregnancy support with a clinic. As you can imagine, there's lots of unplanned pregnancies specifically. And so I'm really excited to just advocate alongside these women and just be a loving support for them as they face whatever challenges come their way. The other thing that we are going to be doing is working with missionary kids, also known as third culture kids. I gave this diagram in Sunday school of just, my parents are a blue culture. I lived in a yellow culture in Rwanda, and I became green because I'm a mix of both places. So you kind of just never really fit anywhere fully. I'm not blue anymore, I'm not yellow, but I'm green now. And so I'm really excited to be able to really just mentor and come alongside third culture kids and relate to them in their experiences that they are having, and then just show them, hey, like, this is what I experienced leaving my home country where I was based at, our host country, and then coming back to America and kind of helping with that transition. And so that's what partially what we'll be doing, is just working with the missionary kids, mentoring them, discipling them, just being kind of an extra set of people who are just loving on them.
Yeah, and so overall, what you can be praying for us for, we're at about 35 to 40% of our monthly support, which is fantastic. That's a huge praise for us, being that we just figured out that we were going to Thailand in October. We made the decision. And so with that comes obviously a huge praise. A couple other things is right now we're in between housing. We're actually living in Megan's cousin's basement at the moment with no kitchen and no dishwasher or anything like that, just a little pedestal sink. And so we just pray that you would be praying for us with wisdom and stuff like that for where we need to be in this time as we're in between moving overseas and we don't have a house or anything like that. So just something for our own space. And then also just for us to be equipped in every way, shape, and form that we can before we leave for the ministries that we're going to be taking a part of. There's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of different things that we need to know how to do and really being really intentional about. And so we just ask that you guys would be praying for that. And then also for just intentionality with our families before we leave. As you can tell, Gary and Barb are just retiring from the field. So they're just coming back to America, and we're like, hey, yeah, we're going to leave, actually. So that's kind of a big thing for us, for Megan especially. Obviously, she's been away from her parents continuously throughout her life. And so just pray that we'll be able to have really great times with our families before we do take off in about 6 to 8 months. So, yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Well, 40 years is a long time, and it's so interesting to arrive at different points in one's life and then to cast your eyes back and to say, how in the world did we get here? And specifically for me, as they tell me that I have been with the mission for 40 years, I say, how did this even happen? I never, ever intended to be a missionary. In fact, on October 10th, 1975, I first went to Rwanda on a short-term missions trip. And while I was there, one of the senior missionaries loved to come to me and say, Gary, do you realize that 50% of short-term missionaries come back? Well, to me, the answer was simple. I said, Paul, that's nice, but 50% do not come back. I am not going to be a missionary. Well, 4 years later, I went back to Rwanda. The odds began stacking against me. This time when I was in Rwanda, Paul said, Gary, do you realize that 75% of second-term short-termers come back as career missionaries? And I said, Paul, do you realize that I am not going to be a full-time missionary because 25% don't come back? But eventually God won out, and it is so amazing because I had all these reasons that I could not be a missionary, but God had other things in plan. And now looking back, it's been such an incredible journey.
So after 40 years on the field, and since 2000, this church has supported Gary, and then when I married him, supported us since the year 2000. First of all, how has God shown his faithfulness over the years? And second of all, what kind of fruit has God produced in the ministry in Rwanda as a result of their prayer and support? What's their return on investment, honey?
Well, God has done incredible things. And the interesting thing about God, as you well know, is that he often does things outside of the box, and he does things in areas that we aren't expecting him to do. So as I look back over these last 40 years, the first decade that we like to call was really a decade of new beginnings. We were focusing on starting new churches. We were showing the Jesus film. And so that was a primary focus during that first decade. Unfortunately,
So this single to the rapture, bachelor to the rapture, thought, I don't want to do this alone. And there was a young woman from Pekin, Illinois, who was actually over in Rwanda teaching English or teaching some homeschool to some of the families there. Okay. Melanie Baker was over in Rwanda as a single. They met, fell in love, and the rest is history. we can't in this decade we can't underestimate the impact that Melanie had as a missionary on the field. Once Gary and Melanie got married, Melanie began translating the Awana program into Kinyarwanda and began teaching and implementing it in a number of different churches. And today, we are blessed by the impact that she made in a number of those lives. We work today with people who were kids in that program and who are living solid biblical godly lives, and we are grateful for the impact that Melanie had in the lives of Rwandans and also in our lives.
So the next decade we've entitled the Dark Decade. It seemed like it was one bad thing after another. It began in 1994 with the Rwandan genocide, when in the course of only 100 days, there were between 800,000 and 1 million people in Rwanda who were slaughtered. As the majority, Hutu tribe tried to completely exterminate people from the Tutsi tribe.
Well, even though we call this the dark decade, as God usually does, he brings some light in the midst of that dark decade. And Megan and Melissa were the light in this dark decade. In 1996, Melissa was born. 1998, Megan was born, and their family began. And as God has it, very often things changed a bit with ministry, but God was really faithful.
Unfortunately, during that same decade, Melanie came down with breast cancer when Megan was just 1 year old. And in spite of the best efforts of medical community, after a year and a half of battling breast cancer, in 2001, Melanie passed away and went home to be with the Lord. And so here I was, a single dad with a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old daughter. And the question was, what am I going to do? I really felt like God wanted me to go back to Rwanda. But as I expressed that opinion to people expressed their rather strong opinion that I was crazy. They said, there's no way you're going to take 2 little girls back to a war-torn country. And so it was a huge struggle for me. I mean, what was I going to do? And yet the more I prayed about it, the more I felt convinced and convicted that God wanted me to go back to Rwanda. And so in 2002, I packed up the girls, and the 3 of us headed back to Rwanda. The next decade was New Beginnings.
So in this decade, New Creation Ministries really began to take hold, and Gary facilitated the building of buildings there for the ministry to begin having one place.
Yeah, it was incredible, because as we began New Creation Ministries, one of our huge needs was property. We needed a land on which we could build this facility. And so we prayed and we prayed and prayed. And to look back now, it's incredible, because for $18,000, we were able to purchase 5 acres of land, which at the time seemed like it was too far out of the city. Well, today it is now in the center of one of the most bustling and influential neighborhoods in all of the city of Kigali. The property probably today is worth about $1 million. There's a major bus hub right there, just outside the gate of the property. And as always, God knew what he was doing in helping us get that piece of land.
So on the other side of the world, there was a missionary. She was 44, still single, and thought, God, why haven't you given me a husband yet? I've served you all these years. Where's the man you've been calling me to? And in Rwanda, Gary was saying, this single parenting isn't all it's cracked up to be. I'm not sure I want to go back to Rwanda as a single dad. Well, as Christ would have it, we met on not eBay, but eHarmony, and he was my second match. I was his 1,968th match, but we were married. I became a first-time mom, a first-time wife. I'd probably only dated maybe 3 or 4 guys in my whole life, because I felt I needed to go where God had called me to go, where he'd opened the door, and he needed to be faithful. And there weren't a whole lot of guys in Japan and Korea for me. But we met on eHarmony, got married in 2006, and I moved to Rwanda with them in less than a year. So we were married in April 2006. We were in Rwanda by December 2006. And my job, just as Megan and Paul's job, my job was to learn language and culture. Now, I moved from everything that was familiar to me into a world where everything was familiar to Gary, and it was hard. It was hard being a first-time mom. It was hard being a wife. It was hard to figure out what that looked like in Rwanda, and I'm learning a language. Now, I'd learned French, German, Italian in college because my degree was in opera. I studied Korean, I studied Japanese, I even studied a little Tagalog. I thought, how hard could Kinyarwanda be? Well, it was really hard, let me tell you. And I felt like a failure at every front. I felt like a failure as a wife and a mom, as a language learner, as a cultural learner. And I just thought, Lord, what did I do? What did I get myself into? But I soon discovered that if I could do something I knew how to do, all of those different challenges and difficulties were easier to manage. So I began teaching music in the girls' homeschool co-op. I started a choir. I started a ukulele group. I taught, the girls and I would sing in different Rwandan churches, and when I was able to do that, the Lord restored my confidence, and it made it easier to be able to work through the language, and it started to come easier, and being a mom started to become natural.
Well, being a farm kid from southern Minnesota, I've always been interested in agriculture, and 84% of Rwandans are involved in subsistence agriculture. And so one of the things that God has enabled me to do at our Bible school is to start an agricultural demonstration area where we experiment with all kinds of crazy things like growing tilapia fish in these 1 cubic meter tanks, raising black soldier fly larvae as a protein source for our animals, raising pigs, raising goats, raising worms, making our own fertilizer. And it's really been exciting to see how God has been able to use that to not only help our students, but then also to reach out into the neighboring communities to help people.
So the final decade is called Growth and Closure, where we began to think about retirement and decide where we should go and what we should be, how we should finish well.
And so one of our major focuses this last decade has been on training Rwandans who can continue on in our absence. And God has just really blessed us with some great people. Just a year ago, Justin became the first Rwandan director for New Creation Ministries and is doing a fabulous job. A man of incredible vision and enthusiasm and passion. And we're just so excited to see what God is going to do through Justin as the director of New Creation Ministries.
And just like in the dark period, God brought some light. In this wonderful light decade, there was the darkness of COVID. But during COVID, we recognized just how resilient the Rwandan churches were, and the Rwandan people were. All of the churches were closed, and there's no, if the government says you do it, you do it. If you're the only person driving in a car and you didn't have a mask on, you'd get ticketed. So we followed the rules religiously, no pun intended. But what do you do if you can't meet as a church and you're in a rural area? So the pastors came up with this brilliant idea of having conference calls. So they would, most people had a cell phone. The pastor would call everybody and they would have church via cell phone, which was just beautiful. And these are some pictures from our church. We had our cell meetings every Wednesday, but I tell you, when we finally got to meet back in person after many months, it was a beautiful, beautiful time of rejoicing.
We've also been, in this last decade, God has been able us to see all three of the women in my life have received their degrees. Both of the girls attended Northwestern College University in St. Paul, and have graduated. Melissa has gone on and has gotten her master's degree in counseling. Barbara went back to school 5 years ago and just has recently gotten her master's degree in music therapy. And it's just been such a neat experience to see how God has brought closure in that important area.
And also in these last 3 years, Megan brought a new member into our family, the son that Gary always wished he'd had, maybe. But it's been a joy to have Paul as a member of our family and to include him in our prayer cards and things. Just exciting to see the family growing. So what are some takeaways after these last 40 years of ministry?
I think one of the big lessons that I look back is to realize that, in my humanness, I tend to focus on one area and say, okay, God, here's where you need to be at work. And so I pour all of my efforts and we pour all of our resources into this one area, which is okay. But now in looking back, you realize, you know what? While we were so focused in this one area, God was over here doing his own thing, which is just as important and is just as powerful. And it's so interesting to see how that God, if we are faithful in following the Lord and being obedient to the Lord, it might not feel like a lot is happening, but as long as we are faithful to God, we can always be confident that God is accomplishing his purposes.
For me, it's just amazing that God chooses to use ordinary people like us. We're no different than you. God, somebody once said a missionary isn't always an evangelist. A missionary is somebody who enjoys making their home in a culture that's not their own and being light within that culture. And we're grateful that God has allowed us to be light in the communities of Rwanda that we've been able to be a part of. And we are imperfect people, and yet God doesn't care about ability. He cares about availability. And our job now in these last few months has been to just really encourage the next generation of missionaries. Look, God is looking for availability, and he wants you to be light in whatever area it is that you are in. Sometimes I will ask the cashier at Hy-Vee, can I just pray for you? Rarely will they say no, but I make it quick and I make it polite. But God still wants to use us wherever we are, as long as we're available to be used by him. Ordinary, imperfect people, and yet God chooses to use us.
So one of the things that we're most excited about leaving behind in Rwanda is the school, New Creation Ministries. And one of the most exciting things that happens at New Creation Ministries is that as pastors and as ministry leaders come to this school, we're able to begin with the very basics of what does it mean to be a Christian? How does a person become a Christian? And surprisingly, even after all these years, one of the things that we see new year after year is that as a new class of students come in, a lot of these students really don't understand salvation. And so as we explain the gospel, they are then given the opportunity of actually accepting Christ as their personal Savior. And usually about a third of our students will accept Christ for the first time during that first session of classes. And so that's just so exciting to see the work that God is doing through New Creation Ministries.
These are ministry leaders, which is really exciting. In addition, we had a university level program. The leadership training school was taught in Kinyarwanda, the national language, but we also had a university level class taught in the language of English and was geared toward business leaders and other church leaders within the city of Kigali. But unfortunately, the government came up with a whole string of accreditation issues, and we had to shut the school. But we were able to open short courses that happen monthly. We bring in a teacher from the States or from Rwanda who will teach these classes, and it's just been a beautiful impact on business leaders and church leaders, where they come and they learn about the gospel, they learn about different biblical principles, and then initiate those in their churches. So this is another exciting part of resilience that the Rwandan church and the Bible school have come up with.
It's exciting for me to look back and to realize that the agricultural work that we started is continuing on. A Rwandan lady by the name of Chantel has worked with me for 16 years, and she's continuing on.
So I talked in Sunday school about music therapy. Some of you may not know what music therapy is, but basically, music therapy is the process of using music to address non-musical goals. If you have strength issues in your hands, I'll teach you to play the ukulele to encourage those muscles to keep strong. If you have emotional issues, we can process trauma and bring encouragement. So music therapy is really powerful, and I'm excited to say that I think it's going to continue in Rwanda in my absence. So what are some things we won't miss?
Well,
These are questions that everyone asks us.
so one of the things we're not going to miss is the traffic. Now, we lived very close to a major intersection that was 3 lanes going each way. And one of the things that was this intersection was infamous about was that if you were in the right-hand lane, you could almost be certain that the car in the right-hand lane wanted to turn left. And so even though there were stoplights there, even though there were always a minimum of 4 policemen standing there, it was chaos at this intersection every time you went through it. So we're not going to miss that at intersection.
I'm not going to miss the water and electricity going out. This picture is a picture of the one of the short courses. The pastor had come from America. He was teaching. Electricity went off, and he thought, I guess we're going to be done for tonight. But before he knew it, everybody pulled out their cell phones, and he was able to teach the rest of the class via cell phone. So again, Rwandans are resilient, and they'll find a way. I'm also not going to miss having things not be available in the stores. Very often, you'll go into a store, and Gary's motto is, if you want it, buy it, because it won't be there when you go back, and that's for sure. Every now and then, we've been able to buy Dr. Pepper, like for some odd reason. Then we go back, and it's all gone. Or gluten-free flour, I could buy it cheaper than in America, but all of a sudden it was there and then it was gone.
Another thing is that the president or the president's family living in the capital city, they move around a lot. But in order for them to move around, they shut down everything. And so you may be out, and all of a sudden there's a policeman steps out in front of you and shuts down the road, and there you sit. And you don't know for how long, you don't know why you're sitting there. But that was an occurrence that happened a lot, and I'm not going to miss that. So what are some of the things you're going to miss?
I'm going to miss community. You know, we had an incredible opportunity to be a part of so many different communities. Here in America, we are defined by our own accomplishments. In Africa, it's a community-based society rather than an individual-based society. So in Rwanda, we were defined by the communities that we were a part of. Many times I would go to the market and I would sing to people in Kinyarwanda, and they would immediately say, well, what church do you worship at? Because they want to identify my community. They want to know. And the beautiful part of that is that then we begin to realize the things that I do reflect on my community, whether it's my family, the workers that we work with, or our church, or the Bible school. What we do is a reflection not just of Christ in people's lives, but the communities that we're a part of.
Some of the other things that we're really going to miss are the wonderful missionary community across the different denominations. If you were a missionary in Rwanda, you were evangelical, and we just had this special fellowship and wonderful community. Another thing that we're going to miss, it sounds funny to say, but we're going to miss the workers in our home. They were so important in helping us to understand what was going on in the culture, and they really were like family. So like Mugenzi worked for me for 26 years. Felician worked for me for over 20 years. And just special people who were there to help us be there. And they facilitated our being there in so many ways. And they were just such a special part of our lives.
So here's some prayer requests that you can pray with us. If you have a cell phone and you want to snap a picture of that slide just to have it. I am going to be working as a global specialist with World Venture, helping support missionary kids globally as needed. There are a number of kids who have special needs. Just because they're missionaries doesn't mean they don't have special needs, and so I'll be advocating for them. Also figuring out what it looks like to be a music therapist in southern Minnesota. You can also be praying for us as we launch our kids into ministry. Megan and Paul are going to Thailand. Melissa is going to Tunisia, and we just want to be successful at doing that.
So, as we look back over these 40 years, again, God's faithfulness has just been so incredibly evident. And, one of my huge hang-ups 40 years ago when I first got into missions was, I'm not a public speaker. How am I going to raise money? Well, you know what? Looking back, every single year of these 40 years, God has provided all of the funds that we have needed. Whether or not we were fully supported or not, by December 31st, every single year, all of our support needs have come in. And so God has just been so incredibly faithful. So Barb's going to close by singing a song which talks about the faithfulness of God, which is just kind of our closing testimony that God has been so incredibly faithful to us.
I just want to say another thing that we're going to miss is this. We're going to miss being able to be a part of churches like you, being able to share our lives and be able to share with you in ministry overseas and be your representatives.